All right, welcome to tonight's show. I'm going to jump in and do a little future forecasting on Bitcoin and MSTR. What if Bitcoin goes up by 30% a year in the next 5 years? What if it goes up by 50%? What will that mean for MSTR? So we're going to take a look at that tonight and get into it, okay? And also, I did a little math projections here. So we're going to walk through this scenario here of how high could MSTR go. All of it's hypothetical, not financial advice, not tax advice, not legal advice. Do your own research. But while gold is ripping and silver is ripping and Bitcoin is just sitting there, what could the future look like? So I want to jump into that. I also want to talk tonight about Saylor and his considerations of how problematic could it be for strategy? And Saylor kind of puts a laughing twist on this in his comment today that I'm going to share. But where would strategy get into any considerations or concerns with paying the dividend out to their shareholders? So we're going to look at that example as well. And then we're going to see what happened with strategy, how much they bought this week and how much BMNR bought, and see what that means for the future. So let's jump in. So I'm going to walk you through a little scenario here of MSTR and what MSTR could look like 5 years from now, price-wise. Again, it's all hypotheticals, but let's first look what happened with Bitcoin. Lots of triggered liquidations took place. Around 87,000 Bitcoin fell to when the liquidations hit. And if you look at the chart now, you see Bitcoin 87,500. That was as of hours ago. When this happened, many traders were liquidated around there, and that means they were forced to close because they lost too much money. So almost 750 million was wiped out in one day across crypto, which is a lot. And if you look at these cryptocurrency liquidation history levels, you see the different spikes and liquidations here on the chart. This made the price drop faster and harder, and that's why we're seeing Bitcoin sit around 87,000, 88,000. So Saylor's considerations here, it's kind of funny. As long as Bitcoin goes up 1.25% a year, we can pay the dividend forever. If Bitcoin stops going up, we got 80 years to figure out what we're going to do about that. All right. So he's not concerned about what's happening in the short term. He's clearly looking into the long term. So as Saylor's looking into the long term, I figured why not do an example and show what could potentially happen with strategy over the next 5 years. And if we just looked at an assumption of strategy buying about $250 million a week. So this is just an assumption. What if they bought $250 million worth of Bitcoin per week? What could the stock actually go to? So I'm going to show you that example. If you want to get if you want to get a better look at this, I'll zoom in here so you can see it. Also, if you want to grab my book Money Game, you can snag it down below as well and get a free copy and learn all about strategy and BMNR and Bitcoin. But for now, what we're going to do is go straight to this projection of what's going to happen to MSTR in 5 years if they keep buying this much Bitcoin. So here's the chart. Let's take a look, okay? So if you take a look at the assumptions, and again, these are just assumptions, not financial advice, but I'm like, if I'm going to hold MSTR for the next 5 years, what does it actually mean for me? So if you look at the assumptions with Bitcoin today at 88,000 and MSTR at $161 per share, you see that strategy owns approximately 3.4% of the Bitcoin supply. So as you're looking at that, one has to question, like, what could happen in the future with strategy? And let's just assume, oops, I got to turn off my mic here because it's writing over. So let's just assume for a second that the assumptions here are $250 million per week times 5 years would be $65 billion bought by strategy. So again, if strategy just buys $250 million per week for the next 5 years, they would buy $65 billion more worth of Bitcoin. Now, that total depends on what the average Bitcoin price is. So there's a lot of assumptions going here into what strategy could grow to over the next 5 years, but we're going to assume some Bitcoin prices in terms of what they're going to buy Bitcoin at. Now, this isn't too exaggerated in terms of the fact that strategy could, on average, buy $250 million per week of Bitcoin. And the reason is, if you look at the last 3 or 4 weeks, there's certain weeks where they bought $1 billion. There's this most recent week, they bought over $200 million. So if you take $1 billion and you average it out over 4 weeks, that's $250 million a week. So let's assume strategy has some weeks where they don't buy a lot, then some weeks where they buy $1 billion. I don't think it's too unreasonable to think that strategy would average $250 million per week of Bitcoin buys over the next 5 years. So if they did that, and we look at a NAV multiple of 1.5 to 2x. Now, clearly, the NAV multiple right now is just barely above 1. But we know during bullish times, the NAV multiple for strategy goes up, meaning it trades at a premium. The stock trades at a premium to the net asset value of its Bitcoin. So you look at the Bitcoin on its balance sheet minus its liabilities. You look at the net asset value there, which is the Bitcoin, and the stock will trade at a premium. When it trades at 1.5 NAV multiple on the screen, that's a 50% premium the stock's trading at. If it trades at a 2, it's a double. It's 100% premium it's trading at. So if this happens and strategy trades around this NAV multiple, let's look at what potentially strategy's price point could go to over 5 years. So Bitcoin first, we got to look at that because that's the underlying asset. So this just assumes Bitcoin going up 30% per year for the next 5 years. So I have a scenario where I'll show you 30% per year for the next 5 years. And then I have a scenario where I'll show you 50% for Bitcoin over the next 5 years. And then we'll look at what strategy's price could go to. Okay. So we take a look here, and if Bitcoin goes up by 30% a year over the next 5 years, that would be a 3.7x growth. And so Bitcoin would be at $325,000. So that's how Bitcoin gets to $325,000 from today's price point of 88K. So if strategy accumulates, so we're looking at strategy, remember in the scenario, strategy would be accumulating $65 billion worth of Bitcoin. Because if they bought 250 million Bitcoin per week, $1 million worth of Bitcoin per week over the next 5 years, that could equate to $65 billion. Okay. And if you assume an average Bitcoin price, because you really got to look at the average price they're buying at. And this is where it gets super variable because they're buying now when Bitcoin's at 90,000 or 88,000 today. But their most recent buy was 90,000. And over the next 5 years, if they continue to buy, we got to assume an average price they would buy at. So let's assume an average price of 200,000. All right. So if strategy buys 250 million a week for the next 5 years, that's $65 billion they're buying of Bitcoin. And if they buy it at an average price of $200,000, that means they would accumulate 325,000 additional Bitcoin. Okay, 325,000 additional Bitcoin. Now, this is an important point because it depends what price they buy it at. So when you see the $200,000 here on the screen, we're assuming they're buying Bitcoin at a $200,000 average price over the next 5 years. So their existing Bitcoin is 700,000, let's call it, plus their new Bitcoin holdings would be an additional 325,000 that they would buy over the next 5 years. And 5 years from now, if they kept buying at 250 million a week, they'd have over 1 million Bitcoin. And so if you look at that, that's basically how strategy gets to 5% of the supply or 4.9% of supply. So we know as we're looking at BMNR, that BMNR's target is to get to 5% of the supply of Ethereum. Clearly, they're going to do that. They're 70% of the way there. If we look at strategy, strategy has to do some aggressive buying over the next 5 years to get to about 5% of the Bitcoin supply. And that's assuming that there's 21 million Bitcoin out there, and we know that many people have lost their wallets. So strategy would essentially control more of the supply because a lot of people have lost their wallets. But just call it what it is, 4.9% of all the Bitcoin. All right. So you look at that, and now we go down and we look at the value of their Bitcoin stack. So again, if you're just joining us, this is a projection of what MSTR could grow to over the next 5 years in terms of the stock price in relation to Bitcoin growing as well over that time period. All right. And this is just taking into account a 30% compound annual growth rate for Bitcoin, all right, over the next 5 years. And so if strategy keeps buying and buying every single week, then eventually strategy would have 1 million Bitcoin, 1.025 million. Times $325,000, and then they would have $333 billion worth of Bitcoin. All right. So that shows you that they would have a lot of Bitcoin. They already have a lot of Bitcoin, but they'd have a lot more if they keep buying. Now, with a 1.5x NAV, their market cap would be $500 billion. So the way you get to that is pretty simple. If you look at $333 billion, which is what Strategy could have in terms of Bitcoin on their balance sheet in 5 years, that means a 1.5x NAV. That's like a 50%. The stock's trading at 50% over the net asset value of its Bitcoin. So instead of 333 billion, their valuation would be $500 billion. Okay, because it's approximately 50% more. If you look at a 2x 2.0 NAV, then the market cap of Strategy would be $665 billion. All right, so that's how you see Strategy getting to a larger market cap. Clearly, they have to hit this, be trading at a premium to the net asset value of their Bitcoin. Again, right now they are not. They're trading a very small premium over, but in the past they have traded at premiums. And if Bitcoin goes bullish again in the future, this is very real for Strategy. So this is an implied MSTR stock price here. This is a very rough estimate because we cannot predict what the NAV is going to be for Strategy in the future. We don't know. We can't predict what the average price point they're going to buy Bitcoin at over the next 5 years. But we can make some assumptions just to see what's possible. I always like to make some predictions to see, if I'm holding X amount of Strategy, what could it be worth for me in 5 years? So there you have it. So let's take a look. And this is today's $161 price point for Strategy. So in this case, if we have $500 billion in terms of the market cap of Strategy, they would be worth $800 to $900 per share under this scenario. Now, mind you, this is simply a projection if Bitcoin does 30% per year over the next 5 years, and Strategy continues to acquire $250 million of Bitcoin every single week for the next 5 years, which is a lot of Bitcoin. And their MNAV or their NAV, they traded a 1.5x to their net asset value, which would be a 50% premium their stock would be trading at. Their share could be $800 to $900. If they traded a 2x, then the share price could be $1,050 to $1,200 per share. So if you're looking at that now, if you're looking at the potential of a $800 to $900, that's about a 5x from here. And if you're looking at $1,000 to $1,200, that's about, whatever that is. That's, if you do quick math on that, that's 5, 6, that's 7, that's over 7x. Okay. So that'd be over 7x with current math. Okay. So if you take a look at that, it's like, okay, we could get a 5 to 7x on Strategy. That's assuming that Bitcoin goes up by 30% a year for the next 5 years. Bitcoin would do a 3.7x. In this scenario, Strategy would do a 5x. In this scenario, Strategy could do close to a 7x. All right. So that is just a simple math equation. And in summary, and before I move on to scenario two, this assumption is that Strategy buys $250 million worth of Bitcoin every week for the next 5 years. This is an assumption that Bitcoin grows at 30% every year for the next 5 years, or just on average at 30%. And Bitcoin would do over a 3x. And in this scenario, Strategy would do a 5, a 6, or a 7x, depending on where the stock is trading in relation to the net asset value of its Bitcoin holdings. If it's trading at a high premium, like 1.5 or 2, that's where you get the 5 to 7x of where Strategy's price point is right now. So 5 to 7x of Strategy's price point right now, you can do the math and figure out what the stock could potentially be at. Again, rough estimates. Now, let's take a look if Bitcoin hits 50% per year over the next 5 years. What could happen to Bitcoin's price? So if Bitcoin does 50% a year over the next 5 years, and then you're looking at a 7.6x on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin would hit a $670,000 price point. So when you hear people talking in the year 2031 to 2033, talk of $1 million Bitcoin at some point in the future, well, this is a 50% compound annual growth rate. Bitcoin then gets to 670. Is that more real than $1 million? Yes. When could that hit? Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 7 years. Who knows when it's going to hit? Sometime in the future, potentially. So if you look at this now, we're running the numbers for MSTR. What could MSTR's price point grow to in terms of their stock? Again, they're accumulating $65 billion worth of additional Bitcoin over this next 5 years. This is the assumption. And then if Bitcoin's going to go up much higher, then they're accumulating at an average price that's higher. It's not like they're putting in 250 million a week, like they bought over $200 million this week. And if they kept buying that and buying that and buying that for the next 5 years, they'd acquire a lot more Bitcoin if the price stayed at 88,000. But this is the assumption that the price is going to go up over the next 5 years. So if the Bitcoin price was the average price that they bought it at was 300K over the next 5 years, average price they bought it at, they'll buy some at 90,000, some at 120, some at 150 if it gets there, some at 200, some at 300. This is just an assumption. Some at 400, some at 500. So that means they would buy 215,000 Bitcoin in this scenario. So at the end of 5 years, again, if Bitcoin goes up 50% a year for the next 5 years on average, Strategy buys 250 million a week worth of it. They'd accumulate 215,000 more Bitcoin. They'd have 915,000 Bitcoin. And their percent of the total supply in this case would be 4.35%. So this gives you an idea in both these scenarios of how Strategy gets to 5% of the supply of Bitcoin, 4.35% of the supply of Bitcoin. Who knows what's going to happen? But this just shows if they have 915,000 Bitcoin at a $670,000 price point in 5 years, if Bitcoin's at 670, they have $613 billion on their balance sheet, which is wild. Now, their market cap would be higher because remember, this would be the value of their Bitcoin if Bitcoin went up by 50% a year and Strategy keeps buying Bitcoin every single week, right? At large amounts. So that'd be $613 billion they would have on their balance sheet at assumptions. These are just assumptions. However, if their stock is trading at a premium to the net asset value of their Bitcoin at a 50% premium here, they'd have $920 billion worth of Bitcoin. If they ever traded in the 2x to the net asset value of their Bitcoin, they'd have $1.23 trillion worth of Bitcoin. Or excuse me, $1.23 trillion would be the valuation of their company. So there's talk, in the marketplace of one day could Strategy be a $1 trillion company? And the answer is right here in front of you, that if the assumptions I gave are correct or anywhere in the ballpark, that one day in the future, Strategy could be worth $1 trillion in terms of their market cap. And that's how they get to become a $1 trillion company. And the idea that that could happen in 5 years, 6 years, I don't think that's too far-fetched. We definitely would have to have some movement on Bitcoin. Bitcoin would have to average 50% over the next 5 years for that to happen. But that would be interesting to see if Strategy gets to a $1 trillion market cap. So what does that mean for the stock price? Like, what could Strategy's stock price actually go to? So again, all assumptions, very rough. There's so many variables to factor in here. Like this first variable is how much Bitcoin is Strategy going to buy every single week for the next 5 years? Will they continue to buy every single week? Number one. Number two, what price will they actually buy at? They'll buy at 90, 100, 150, 200,000 into the future. And then number three, will they be trading at a premium to their Bitcoin holdings? Those are many, many assumptions. The assumption is, though, if Bitcoin goes to up 50% a year for the next 5 years and they go on this buying spree every single week of Bitcoin and they trade at a premium to their Bitcoin, 1.5x in terms of the NAV, they could be trading in 5 years at $1,400 to $1,600 per share. And then if the market cap, if they reach a 2x to their net asset value of their Bitcoin, their market cap would go over $1.23 trillion and their share price could be around $2,000. So that's a 9 to 13x from here. And that's a 5 year period. So one is I would say a more conservative play where the first scenario, if you're just joining us, I'm like, okay, let's just look at Bitcoin going up 30% a year for the next 5 years. So that's scenario A we looked at. And then scenario B, we looked at Bitcoin going up 50% a year for the next 5 years, with Strategy clearly accumulating Bitcoin every single week at an aggressive rate. So that's what could happen in the future. So here's the takeaways from what we just did today. 30% Bitcoin compound annual growth rate, MSTR, could potentially go to 800 to 1200 per share in the next 5 years. And that's depends on where it's trading in terms of its premium, if the stock's trading at a premium and how high. 50% Bitcoin compound annual growth rate, MSTR math on this would be shares 1400 to 2200. That could be the potential in the future if MSTR continues to buy more Bitcoin every single week for the next 5 years. And this is an assumption that they spend $65 billion on Bitcoin over the next 5 years. And if they do this, they end up owning 4 to 5% of all the Bitcoin if the assumptions are correct. So there's your math. It's pretty interesting. To take a look at this, you would have to assume that they're going to continue to buy. So why I think one of these scenarios is probable is the fact that they're going to continue to buy. They've shown that they're going to continue to buy. Will they average $250 million of buys every week for the next 5 years? That's pretty aggressive. If we hit some rough times, they might not average $250 million a week. I'm not saying they're averaging that right now, but if you look, they bought billions and billions of dollars over the last month. This past week, they bought over $200 million. So let's see if they continue to buy week after week and how aggressively they buy. And then you look at one day, I think that there is an opportunity that strategy will trade at a premium again, 50% premium. And in bullish times, they'll trade at 100% premium. So we will see if that happens. And that's why you have Saylor, who literally says, as long as Bitcoin goes up 1.25% a year, we can pay the dividend forever. So he's not concerned about paying out these dividends that he's paying on Strike and Strife and Stride and Stretch. A lot of people are asking, can you afford to pay out these dividends that you're paying in terms of 10, 11% yields on these products that you're issuing in the marketplace? And his answer here is pretty straightforward. Yes, he can. And he's not concerned about it. So not being concerned about liquidation or not being concerned about paying the shareholders because he can, it allows him to focus on one simple strategy, which is to accumulate more and more and more and more Bitcoin, and to accumulate it every single week. It looks like they're intending to do that. So that's what's happening with Saylor. We'll go a little bit more into their buys here of what they bought this past week. If you look at a little bit of a flip on this, on some bearish news, Keith Allen says the weekly close matters the most now for Bitcoin, and pay close attention to the weekly close for Bitcoin. The only thing more bearish than a weekly close below the yearly open timescape level at 87.5 would be a weekly close below the 100-week simple moving average. So look for Bitcoin closing above this price level for sure. And I'll show you later some charts of Bitcoin closing above 91K and why that's important as well. So we'll get into some graphs on that. And that's just a chart of showing certain Bitcoin prices throughout the course of the last year or two. So Keith Allen says Bitcoin's in a danger zone right now, explains that quick price moves don't matter as much as where Bitcoin closes in the next week. So let's see where it closes. If Bitcoin stays below important levels, it could fall more. A very important meeting's happening this week is the Fed is meeting, of course, the Federal Open Market Committee. The likelihood of them cutting interest rates is very, very slim. But this group often decides with their microphone when they say things, what's going to happen in the market. So we need to see what the Fed's going to say when they get on the microphone. The target rate probabilities I just shared, very, very low chance that they're going to cut interest rates. So we'll see what happens. We'll see when Jerome speaks. Bitcoin can move fast in either direction. So I think people are being conservative this week, and traders are being extra careful. Gold and silver have been going up, as we know, while Bitcoin's not. So if you look at gold and silver prices, they're crushing it. Gold just keeps climbing. Silver's going parabolic. And if you look at silver, I mean, gold's above $5,000 and silver's above $100. Silver price points on silver is 260%. So 260% growth over the last year when you look at the growth of silver, which is insane. So Bitcoin is not the story of the day right now because it's staying quiet instead. And many experts think that there could be a later move from gold and silver back into Bitcoin, but who knows what's going to happen with that. There's the silver price point. If you look at the rate of return, I should say 269% in 1 year. That's huge, massive. The fear is high, but the selling is still calm, and new Bitcoin buyers are selling at a loss and they're showing fear. And if you look at the short-term holder realized profit loss ratio here basically says that short-term holders are realizing losses on the crash down to $86,000. So when we had this liquidation event, we shot down to $86,000. Short-term holders are realizing some losses here. But this isn't panic selling. There's still many buyers and the market is holding up. And so if we look at this, this is an important graph. If you take a look, and I'll put it in English, it's pretty simple. If you look at the purple line down here, you see the purple line, and that is actually the Bitcoin price. And so we see that purple line where Bitcoin's around $88,000. If you look at this like yellowish brown line, that's the volume of what's going on. And if you look at this solid kind of pink line, that's like, it's a kind of call it like the temperature line of where an unusual amount of Bitcoin buying has taken place recently. So an unusual amount of buying has taken place around $91,000. And so anytime you see the yellow go above that, that means the buyers are in control and there's more buying pressure. Anytime you see it go below that 91,000, which is the pink line, that means the sellers are in control. So you see recently, all the way over to the right here, you see a spike down on the yellow. That means the sellers are in control. And we've seen that by the liquidations that happened recently. So in plain English, what does that mean to us? Why do we care? We want to see Bitcoin go up above 91,000, because when Bitcoin's up above 91,000, that's where the buyers have been in control. And that's where a lot of buying has taken place recently. So the people who bought recently at 91,000, when it goes below that, they're sitting there in a loss. And so when it goes back above 91,000, the recent buyers are in control, and we are, that's a good price point to look at. So I would be looking for the close to be closing above 91,000 over the next week, 2 weeks. Just that's more of a safe level to look at for those of us who are long on Bitcoin. Okay. For those people who are short, they're happy right now because it's below. So that's how I would look at that chart. And I just explained it, so we don't need to go more into this. So Strategy buys more Bitcoin. They just bought 2,932 Bitcoin, $257 million in stock to buy 2,932 Bitcoin. They continue to do it week after week. It's unbelievable how much Bitcoin he's accumulating. If you're just joining us, I just gave a scenario of where Strategy's price point could go in the future based on Bitcoin growing at 30% per year or 50% per year, and the accumulation of Bitcoin on Strategy's balance sheet, assuming they buy 250 million a week, which is aggressive buying, but we just wanted to look at some price scenarios. Also, if you don't know a lot about Strategy and you're just joining the show, feel free to get educated on it. You can read a whole bunch on it. I wrote an entire book about Strategy and BMNR and Bitcoin and Ethereum and traditional finance. So you can get it down below. It's completely free. You can also get my trading strategy. If you didn't watch my last video, I showed you how we're trading BMNR right now, or I am, and my community's trading it, and how it can be super lucrative to be trading this stock. And I showed the exact time frames of how I'm looking at BMNR right now and making decisions on it. So if you're interested in trading on a weekly basis, you'll like the video down below. You can snag that also. Okay. All right. So let's get back into Strategy's buys. They buy 2,932 Bitcoin, 257 million. It's huge, huge. Cost around $90,000 is what the price point is that they bought it at. That's certainly a lot of Bitcoin. They bought billions the week before. And if you look at Saylor here, he announces the buy 264 million at 90,000. There's a combination here of MSTR and Stretch. If you don't know anything about Stretch, that's one of their most popular products right now. I did a recent video on Stretch that really goes into this and talks about how there's a lot of money sitting in money market funds, and we know that those money market funds aren't paying out a lot, and how Stretch's effective yield right now is about 11%. So when people go to retire in the future and they start to get more confidence in Bitcoin and Strategy, and they're starting to look at where they're going to go park their money, they're either going to look at a money market fund or they're going to look at something like Stretch or other options. But Stretch, it's paying 11%, which is huge. So it just shows the future of what Strategy could do with these products that it's issuing. Of course, when it issues more shares of these products, it uses it to buy Bitcoin, but the potential is massive. And the money market, I think marketplace in terms of the amount of money that's in money markets, I think is about $7 trillion. So if Strategy could capture just a small percentage of that using its Stretch products, it could do some serious damage in the marketplace. How did they pay for it? Well, they didn't use cash from the bank. They sold company shares. So they sold MSTR, as I just said, and they sold their special preferred stock, which is Stretch. This also gives them money to buy more Bitcoin. So if you haven't been following what Strategy does, a lot of times they'll tap the ATM, means they'll issue more shares of MSTR. And when they issue those shares, they'll use the money to buy more Bitcoin, or they'll issue more of their preferreds, which is Stretch and Strife and Stride and Strike. And then they'll use that money to buy Bitcoin. Bottom line is they're issuing more shares in the marketplace and they use it to buy Bitcoin. And that's what they do. How much Bitcoin do they have now? 712,000 Bitcoin. That's about 3.4% of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist. And this makes Strategy the largest public company in the world holding Bitcoin. Now, if you're just joining us, I showed before an example of how Strategy could get to 5% of the supply of Bitcoin. It's not unrealistic to think that they could get there. They have to buy about $65 billion more worth of Bitcoin over the next 5 years to get there, assuming the assumptions that I assumed, which is a lot of assumptions. What is Bitcoin going to grow at in terms of its compound annual growth rate? How much are they going to buy every single week? What prices are they going to buy at? So there's lots of assumptions there, but I think it is real that Strategy one day, if not in 5 years, will get to 5% of the Bitcoin supply. So are they making money? Well, on paper, they bought Bitcoin at an average price of 76,000. Bitcoin is now near 87,000. So Strategy is sitting on about 8.3 billion in unrealized profit. Why this matters for the market: Strategy still has billions of dollars available to raise more money. They could keep buying more Bitcoin. This adds long-term buying pressure to the market. And the reality is, for us shareholders, it's accretive if they buy more Bitcoin when Strategy, when the stock is trading at a premium to the net asset value of the Bitcoin. So when you see these numbers like the NAV is 1.07, that means it's trading at a 7% premium to the net asset value of its Bitcoin. And when it's above and it's trading at a premium, they can tap the ATM all day long, because for me as a shareholder, it's accretive, meaning I get more Bitcoin per share. So a lot of people think, well, Strategy is issuing more shares and they're issuing more shares. And if there's a pizza pie and the pie keeps getting bigger, people are concerned. They issue more shares and the pizza pie keeps getting bigger and keeps getting bigger. But the fact is, the toppings that they're adding on, which is Bitcoin, the Bitcoin that they're stacking and adding on is more and more valuable than the increase in the shares. And so for shareholders, it's super valuable because you get more Bitcoin per share. And even if you don't buy anymore, even if you just have shares and you're sitting there and you're like, I hold the shares, and they keep stacking Bitcoin, you're getting more Bitcoin per share. As long as they're doing it in an accretive way, and they have been doing it in an accretive way for the last 5 years. Maybe there's a week here or a week there where they haven't, but in the main, they're really watching out for their shareholders in the long term. So big buyers like this, if you look at Strategy, they really help support the Bitcoin price. I mean, they're loading in with billions and billions of dollars of buying pressure. And they're opening up the market to just see what they're doing. And more institutions are flowing in as well as a result of Strategy's confidence to buy more Bitcoin. So this is a post from Donald Dean. He basically says Strategy is consolidating at the volume shelf launch area, showing strong support. Once Bitcoin wakes up, this moves. Volume shelf launch area, basically what that is, if you look down here, the price. If you've been watching Strategy over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you've been seeing it around the price point of $160. So basically what he's saying here is there's a lot of agreement at that price point between buyers and sellers. So buyers and sellers, it's Strategy changing hands back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So there's a lot of support at this level, and it forms kind of a shelf if you look at the graph here. And so once Bitcoin wakes up, if that ever happens in 2026, I know we're all falling asleep waiting for Bitcoin to wake up, but if it ever wakes up and Strategy moves, it's got a good support level where it's at right now, and Strategy could go higher. So we shall see what happens. Good news from MSCI. If you've been following this news at all, there was lots of concern at the end of the year that Strategy would be removed from the indexes, and it looked like Strategy was being attacked in some way of like they should not be in the indexes, and there was campaigns, it seemed, that were against them. And so we were all concerned, are they going to be moved out of the indexes? Because a lot of those passive flows of money that come into the indexes that automatically buy more and more MSTR, well, that passive flow might stop. And so there was fear that they were going to be removed from these stock indexes, and that would not be good. But MSCI decided not to remove them, and they are safe, which is good news. So this is important because it avoids forced selling, right? So there's not forced selling. If they said that they can't be in the index, then these companies would have to sell strategy. It reduces market stress because people are like, oh, wow, we're concerned. What's going to happen here? And there's uncertainty, right? Now there's not uncertainty because they announced that they're not going to remove them. And investors feel more confident again. So that's always good news. Now, BitMine continues to rock and roll. 40,000 more Ethereum. Now, if you haven't been paying attention to the story of staking, the fact that BMNR is staking, you're going to want to pay attention to this because it's fascinating. BitMine nears 70% of Ethereum treasury target with latest $40,000 buy, or 40,000 ETH buy. So they are about 70% to their 5% alchemy goal. So they own 3.5% of the ETH supply at this point. So we've been talking about strategy this whole time. I've been holding strategy for the last couple of years, and we watch their strategy of buying more and more Bitcoin, and we watch BMNR following strategy's playbook. And the difference is that BMNR has gotten to 3.5% of the supply of Ethereum in about 6 to 7 months, and it has taken strategy 5 years to get about 3.4% of the supply. So BMNR is definitely one of the stories to pay attention to and get educated on, because this is an incredible growth in terms of accumulation of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Ethereum on their balance sheet. So today's prices, that buy of 40,000 ETH is worth $117 million. So while strategy buys over 200 million, BMNR buys 117 million of ETH. And it shows that both BMNR and MSTR continue to buy aggressively. Tom Lee, there he is. And how much Ethereum does BitMine now have? 4.24 million ETH, worth around $12.3 billion, 3.5% of all ETH in circulation. That is pretty damn big. BitMine is the biggest Ethereum holder, and they are the largest ETH treasury company in the world. The next biggest company holds under 1 million ETH. BitMine holds almost 5 times more. And if you look at stacked ETH holdings by public companies, if you look at BMNR here, we look at the stacked ETH holdings and you look at the graph here, and it just reinforces what I just said. Okay. No other companies even close. They are staking also, which is different than stacking. They're staking a lot of ETH. And so almost half of BitMine's Ethereum is actually staked. So what does staking mean? If you haven't heard of it before, they're basically locking up ETH to help run the network. And they're also earning rewards over time. So they're earning a yield over time. So Tom Lee says when everything is fully staked, when they stake all their Ethereum, they could earn over $1 million per day, around $374 million per year, which is huge, just from freaking staking. So this is why the story for BMNR is interesting for me. And, you know, whether you hold it or not, I just think it's a fascinating story to see that BMNR not only is accumulating Ethereum so quickly, but at the same time, they're staking that Ethereum. So they're not just increasing their amount of Ethereum, they're now getting an income off of Ethereum right now, which is approximately $160 million. And if they stake all of it, their income or their yield from it will be approximately $370 million. So that's a company to just start paying attention to, because they got like the double threat going, while strategy has the single most important threat going on and the most, you know, powerful, optimistic use of the word. They're the single source of you know, companies out there that's buying Bitcoin at that level. And so strategy just accumulates Bitcoin, holds it on the balance sheet. But where if BMNR is the double threat, is they have ETH on the balance sheet and they're getting an income off of it by staking. So I just think that BMNR is just getting started. I think by the looks of MSTR, they're just getting started with their purchases. I mean, they just keep buying and buying and buying. And at this price point, they're gobbling it up, and they're happy to gobble it up at this price point. So that is what's happening from staking with BMNR. And Bitmine owns other assets too. If you haven't followed them, some of you, this might be elementary, but it's always good to revisit what their holdings are. They own some Bitcoin. They got about 600 million in cash. So remember, at one time they had about $1 billion in cash. They clearly have been deploying that cash to buy more Bitcoin, buy more Ethereum, and they have stakes in other companies. So if you listened recently to the news, they bought a stake in Mr. Beast's business. If you didn't watch the video that I did on that, you can go watch it. And they bought a stake in Mr. Beast's business because he has 1 billion subscribers on YouTube. And so when you look at the number of people that are on Facebook or Instagram and YouTube, maybe there's 3 or 4 billion people on the planet on these platforms, and he has 1 billion followers, 1 billion subscribers. So they partnered with Mr. Beast because of the attention that they can get. It's clear that BMNR dominates the monetary airwaves in terms of they got the attention in people's ear that they're acquiring a lot of Ethereum, but now they're also going to be really moving heavily into a new marketplace with all the attention that Mr. Beast gets with 1 billion subscribers. And they're going to capture a whole new demographic because Mr. Beast subscribers, they're not people my age per se. There's some of them are my age, but they got a demographic that is younger as well. And so while you have people that are my age and also people that are older that do subscribe to the channel, you got a whole nother demographic that's not buying BMNR right now, a whole nother demographic that's not buying Ethereum, and they're his subscribers. And so this is a smart partnership for what they're doing. A lot of people thought it was super random, but I think it's super intelligent. And so they continue to take these moonshots and invest in other companies to expand the technology, the blockchain technology out there in the marketplace, expand awareness of it, expand awareness of Ethereum, expand awareness of BMNR. And I think it's a very, very good move that they're making. So Bitmine is a crypto powerhouse. They're not just an ETH holder. And their big goal, as we know, is 5% of all Ethereum. Will they get there? We shall see. That would be about 6 million ETH if they ever get there. I think they're going to get there super fast. I think maybe in 2026, they get to their 5% alchemy goal. So Wall Street is changing its mind, as we know. Tom Lee recently spoke at Davos, where world leaders meet. One of my friends recently went to that meeting last time they had it. Says an incredible meeting. It's the who's who of the financial world that are there. And his takeaway was clear. Big investors now accept crypto. And Wall Street sees crypto plus AI as the future. Digital assets are becoming mainstream. And that is just the bottom line. And I think there's this wave of people in the world, I think, who are early adopters. I think that we are early adopters. People who are watching this channel are early adopters. I know these are the two marketplaces that I'm in. I mean, we just launched a new software company that's an AI software. I've been in AI for the last 3 years, using heavily in my business, using heavily with customers. So I think people who are early adopters, whether it's an AI technology or early adopters in Bitcoin, we're still in the early phase of it. And I think that there's some people out there who are still questioning, is AI going to be a real thing in the future? Is Bitcoin going to be a real thing in the future? We know it's obvious. If you're living in the digital revolution like we are, it's like literally smacking you in the head every day. It's the most obvious thing on planet Earth, I think, right now. But there's a lot of people out there that are behind the curve, and they're the late adopters, and they don't understand truly what's going on. And that's probably the group of people that's sitting in traditional finance for the most part, because people who are sort of the trailblazers and who step into the future faster are people like us. And that's people who got into Bitcoin years ago, and even people are getting into Bitcoin right now. So, and also people are getting into AI right now and actually using it, not just sitting here using a ChatGPT, but actually using it and applying it to their business. So this shows there's growing confidence in crypto. Why? Because of what I just said. Tom Lee just recently spoke at this conference. It's a huge, huge financial conference, and that's the takeaway. So it's pretty obvious what's happening in the market. We would like to see a reflection in the price, not only the price of Bitcoin or the price of Ethereum. We'd like to see the BMNR go up. We'd like to see MSTR go up. Unfortunately, it's not right now, and it's just a pain in the butt, and we're all in a waiting pattern. So that's basically what's going on. I'll give you a quick recap because I thought it was really interesting, the math we did if you're just joining us. So we ran some math, a math scenario. I'll actually show you one more time, just the summary of it. I ran a math scenario of where could MSTR go in the future. And so the math scenario was if, I'll show it to you again. So if MSTR buys, this is the projection. I'll show you the screen. So if MSTR buys We'll go all the way up to the top. This is the summary. So MSTR, if they were to buy 250 million worth of Bitcoin for the next 5 years, what would happen? And this is just total assumptions. But the first assumption I made, and I did a whole presentation on this, so you can go back and watch the video. But the first assumption I made was Bitcoin grows at a 30% compound annual growth rate, and over the next 5 years. And so that's not far-fetched to believe that that would happen. If that did at Bitcoin's current price point, it would go from 88,000 to 300, I think, in 25,000. So Bitcoin would grow by about 3.7x at a 30% growth rate. If that happened, MSTR's share price could be somewhere between $800 and $1,200. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into this, so just track me on this. Number one, they would have to continue to buy Bitcoin on a weekly basis, and my assumption was they continue to buy Bitcoin at $250 million a week. I know it's aggressive, but that's what they're doing right now, and I don't think that that's unfathomable into the future to think that they would continue to do that on average over the next 5 years. Secondly, they would have to trade at their stock would have to trade at a premium to the net asset value of their Bitcoin. And we know that it's barely trading at a premium right now. And so it would have to trade at 1.5 or 2.0, which we saw in the days in 2024 where MSTR was screaming super, super high in price. So if it trades around that, the stock price would be around $1,000 potentially in 5 years from now, with Bitcoin growing at 30% and all those other assumptions being true. Again, not financial advice, just a fun game, okay? Now, 50% Bitcoin compound annual growth rate, you have a different scenario, because then the math points to strategy potentially going to $1,400 or $2,000 in terms of the price point. So this scenario here is a 9 to 13x for strategy over the next 5 years. This scenario here is about a 5 to 7x. The interesting thing about the 50% growth rate of Bitcoin over the next 5 years is that if strategy keeps buying 250 million a week, 250 million a week, 250 million a week, and Bitcoin keeps going up, they're buying Bitcoin at a higher price. So their average purchase price of Bitcoin in this scenario, the average purchase price would be at like $300,000. Because if Bitcoin grows by 50% over the next 5 years, we would see a Bitcoin around $680,000 in the future. And that's the talk of people saying, well, Bitcoin could get to $1 million in 2031 and 2033. All right. So these are future talks. I know everybody here is just like, what happened to the 250 we're all expecting? We're all expecting 250,000. Like, what happened to that? I know. We're still waiting on that. We'd be pleased if Bitcoin hits that at some time in the near future years here. But this is just to see what happens when Bitcoin turns around and eventually goes up, which I believe it will. And that's how I'm planning my portfolio. And then the end game is strategy would own 4 to 5% of all the Bitcoin. And I think it's very real that strategy will definitely get there at some point to 4 to 5% of all the Bitcoin, 5% I'm thinking, because right now they're at 3.4, but they got to buy a lot of Bitcoin. They got to buy a lot. If Bitcoin starts going up over time, they got to buy a lot to get to 5% of supply. So this is over a 5-year period. Who knows in 10 years what they would be at, but that gives you a little math on that. So anyway, I hope it serves you. It's fun to play these projection games of what can happen in the future. At the end of the day, I believe in BMNR. I believe in MSTR. I continue to hold my positions. I trade BMNR on a weekly basis. I had been trading BMNR on a daily basis, but we figured out a really cool new chart in our community to where if you follow the chart for BMNR over the last 2 months and you trade without paying attention to this week, because we only ran the numbers for 2 months going through last week. If you had followed the charts that we were running over the last 2 months and you had traded BMNR on the 2-hour chart, you would have placed a trade every maybe 3 or 5 days. And if you had placed those trades based on the 2-hour chart that we were looking at with TradingView and the combination of James from Invest Answers, some of his indicators, if you had traded the 2-hour chart, you would have had a 34% victory trading BMNR over the last 2 months. So for me, holding BMNR, I would have sold out and bought back low. I would have picked up 34% more shares trading over the last 2 months. My community traded over the last 2 months, and I have tons of success stories I can show you. And so now looking at that chart, and studying that chart. That's a chart that I'm going to be looking at moving forward. So my philosophy is really simple. I hold the majority of my portfolio in MSTR, BMNR, Bitcoin long term. And then there's a portion of my money that I take out and I trade. And so I can pick up more shares of the stock that I believe in. And right now what I'm trading is BMNR. So after that study and that research, thanks to TradingView and Invest Answers, we figured out another cool trading strategy with BMNR that we're running with right now. Prior to that, I was trading it on a daily basis, and I had a run on BMNR where I was just cleaning up on the stock. And so now, when October 10th hit, we saw a huge change because of all the liquidation. So a lot of the indicators and a lot of the things we were seeing in the market in terms of trading was just very uncertain. And now we found a more certain way to trade BMNR. And that's what I'm doing and some of my friends in my community are doing. So if you want more information on that, you can get my book down below, Money Game. There's also a video that shows you the trading strategy. You can snag that. It's 100% free. So if you want it, just go get educated, number one, on MSTR, BMNR, Ethereum, Bitcoin. Took a lot of time to write this book. It's very, very data-driven, this book. But also, if you want to learn the trading strategy, it comes with a video, totally free, and you can actually see the trading strategy. But what's always more fascinating to me, on top of that, is also the book, because getting the data points, pass this on to a friend, getting the data points about traditional finance versus digital finance, this book was so much fun to write because I came out of the traditional finance world for the first 13 years of my life. And then when I got into Bitcoin, I completely saw a totally different viewpoint. So all the data I share in the book is my viewpoint of traditional finance for the first 13 years and all the things I learned about 401k plans and why, to me, they make no sense whatsoever. All the things I learned about inflation, taxes, asset inflation, all of that, all the things I learned about the Federal Reserve and how it actually works, how money printing actually works, all in the book. Fascinating for me to write the book, number one, and then two, give two different viewpoints, one of digital finance and one of traditional finance. So if you want to read it, you can grab it. If you already know this stuff, you can pass it on to a friend or a family member for free. Just send it over to them. I think they'll dig it. And if you want the trading strategy, click down below. You can grab that as well. It comes for free as well. So I hope this serves you. I hope you enjoyed the projections that we did on MSTR. I think it was a lot of fun, and we shall see what the future has to hold. Hang tough. It's a tough time right now. It's quite boring, to be quite honest, unless you're trading. It's very simply, we're sitting, at 87, 90,000 for the last couple months. It's actually quite boring. So that's why I trade. Hope it serves you. See you on the other side and have a great day.